Hi, my name is Amy.
And my name is James.
And this is How I Learned to Love Shrimp, a podcast about promising ways to help animals and build the animal advocacy movement. A really special episode for you this week, as we were asked to interview longtime advocates Matthew Glover and Jane Land live from the Vegan and Animal Rights Conference in Manchester in April 2024. The episode was warm and nostalgic as Jane and Matthew gave us insight into their Veganuary journey. The episode was also recorded and is available on our YouTube channel. And as I didn't read them out on the day, I'm going to start with a little intro to them both, and then we're off with the episode. Matthew and Jane co-founded the online campaign Veganuary in 2013, which has encouraged millions of people across the globe to try being vegan for the month of January and beyond. More recently, Matthew launched Veg Capital, an organisation that provides early-stage capital to companies striving to replace the use of animals in our food system, and founded chicken brand VFC. Jane remains on the board for Veganuary as chair. On the podcast, How I Learned to Love Shrimp, we start off by asking our guests, who's someone in the movement who you find particularly inspiring that others might not know about? And Jane, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Amy. It's a really tricky question to start off with, isn't it? Because there are so many people who are inspiring and continue to do so, including the Veganuary team, and we're going to be talking about them a lot later. So somebody that people might not know is Kate Fowler, because she keeps quite a low profile, so she might not appreciate this shout out. She is the communications director at Generation Vegan, Gen V. She's worked on so many campaigns in the last 30 years. We got her as a freelancer in 2015 with the Veganuary campaign. Matthew challenged her to get us a front page of The Guardian, didn't she? And she did, she delivered, she got us that. But she's also done political lobbying, and she's one of the best writers I've ever come across. And my background's English, so that's quite the accolade. And she wrote the How to Go Vegan book and the Veganuary cookbook.
And she was supposed to be doing the keynote here, right? Which Matthew took over from. So yeah, maybe next year we can all meet Kate and get to know a bit more about her work. And how about you, Matthew?
I'm going to go with Seth Tibbott, who is the founder of Tofurkey. So I don't know if that's classed as the movement, but it's the plant-based food movement, if you like. And he's just like the nicest man in the world. And he set up Tofurkey about 40 years ago, and he started out making tempeh, and he was like this hippie naturalist guy. Yeah. And in the first 9 years of trading, he earned $27,000, not per year. That was over the whole 9 years. He lived in a tree house, and, he just tried and tried and tried. And then he came up with this idea of making a tofurkey, a tofu turkey. Right. And it went viral. It's a bit like Veganuary. It's a portmanteau thing, isn't it? And it went viral, and his business took off from that. And, he's involved in the animal rights movement. He's retired now, but he still comes to lots of the events, and he's really interested in the history of vegetarianism and veganism, and he's just very supportive. He's a Veganuary trustee actually as well, so that's part of the reason why I like him. So he's just really good company.
Yeah, good guy. Nice. For those who don't know those individuals or want to learn more, we always put references and resources in the show notes of the podcast, so we link both of those and their work. Congratulations from James and I on the huge success of Veganuary, this now household name, spanning the last 10 years. From that real kind of initial spark of an idea that you both came up with, that you sold your house to fund, to the incredibly successful global charity that we all know and love. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking those last 10 years with you both. And so to start, can you just talk us through that initial conception in 2013 when you decided to found Veganuary?
We weren't living together at the time, but I remember getting the very excited phone call from Matthew with this latest new idea that he had. And I, like thousands of people since then, mangled the name, and I was going, what, Veganuary? And it's Veganuary.
What's the worst mangling you've had?
Veganuary.
Oh, yeah. Different spin, that one.
There are a few disappointed people coming to our website.
Wow.
Do you want to talk a bit more about the concept?
I mentioned in the keynote earlier that there's a woman called Lisa Shapiro who had spoken to me at a conference and said, what are you good at? And I said, I'm good at sales and marketing. And she said, well, do sales and marketing for the animals. So I guess I had that context in my mind. And I'd previously taken part in Movember, and I remember like really enjoying it, being part of something that other people were doing, growing a mustache, raising money for men's health issues at the time resonated with me. Yeah. So I was like, how can we do something like that for the animals? So yeah, I just had this idea of well, let's do a month where people go vegan. And then we started talking about which month it would be. I mean, the summer would have been easier probably from a like food perspective potentially. But January, with New Year's resolutions and with people being more focused on health and everything, we just thought it had to be January. So then we had vegan January, and then just like, Veganuary? Can we do that?
Does that work?
It sounds really awful, doesn't it? But so that's really how it was born as a concept.
Then we still joke the hardest thing about it is pronouncing the name.
Sure, absolutely. And what made you decide on a pledge in those early days? Were there other ideas of how it would kind of come to fruition?
I think for us, the time-specific pledge was really instrumental in getting people moving. It's less daunting because you're not making a commitment forever. We also find that people find it more acceptable to tell people that they're doing a pledge, rather than I'm just going vegan and all the questions and maybe all the defensiveness that a lot of us have experienced. It's, don't get mad, it's just this thing, and that loads of people are doing it, and find it much more acceptable. So there's comfort and encouragement in mass participation events because you're doing it with all the others. And we know that short-term pledges can create habit change, and always the hope for Veganuary was that it would be a gateway into long-term behaviour change. That was always the hope. And it is the question that we ask people at the end of the month. Are you sticking with it? And we ask them 6 months on, and it's self-reported data, so all the caveats that go along with that. But around about a third tend to stick with it. But just as importantly, the majority of people reduce their animal product consumption.
And interestingly, we did talk to people in the movement about the idea, and I remember one or two people saying, do vegetarian January. And, it's going to be a lot easier. You'll get more people taking part. And obviously there's a logic to that. But obviously ethically and morally, we just couldn't put our names to vegetarian for obvious reasons. But also, I think we sensed that vegan was more of a challenge for people, and it would be more potentially newsworthy, and the media might pick up on it a little bit more. We also at the time were debating, is a month the right amount of time? Maybe we just do a week, maybe we should do a year, or maybe we should do 3 months and everything. But yeah, I think we came around to, let's say 21 days, 22 days, whatever it is, to form a habit. So like we'd give people like a month, so 22 days plus a bit extra.
Yeah.
And help them stick with it that way.
Yeah, sure. And did you have kind of big grand plans for this to be a global pledge, something that would be happening all over the world? Or did it start quite small in a sort of sense of just trying to convince people in the UK?
Matthew's attitude is always go big or go home. I'm more the, why would you go big when you could go home? This balance that we've got between us. But you also, no, it was always, you wanted it global, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm very inspired by Donald Trump with big messages. Yeah, I was always like, how can we get there as fast as we possibly can? And, if we'd had more money, we would have gone faster. But I mean, the reality was that it was just me and Jane at the beginning. So, and we both had full-time jobs as well. So trying to do it, alongside. A few people have asked me in the past, you must be like really pleased with how it went. And I have on occasions just said, well, no, not really. We could have like done a lot more than this. Do you know what I mean? It's like if we had more funding and more resources, we could have done so much more. But yeah, I guess we're quite happy with how it went generally.
I think in terms of changing the landscape in the UK, that was definitely part of our motivation to start with. I think we'd both been vegetarian for 10 years previously. And we wanted to bring veganism in line with that. We knew that it was relatively easy. You could go out, you could find the products, there would always be something on the menu for you. And there was that level of acceptance in society and understanding about what vegetarian was, and whereas veganism was quite far behind that. So we wanted to bring that. That's what we wanted to do, bring it into the mainstream.
Sure. And is that how you would say the kind of working relationship works in terms of Jane being more kind of on the strategic angle, Matthew, you having the big ideas? Is that kind of how this works?
I mean, to be clear, Jane did most of the work.
Sure.
I mean, you actually quit your job first and worked on it full time. So I was more on the creative and the idea side of it and promoting it, really.
Yeah, Matthew's been the vision ideas person. I've been the one scrambling in the background. How can we make this a reality and just slow down a bit? I'm still making notes, still gotta do the plan.
But it worked quite well together because I'm more extrovert, you're more introvert. So I was quite happy going out and talking about it and being almost like the face of it more so than you. Yeah. And you were quite happy sitting back and sort of tidying up around me, really.
Head in hands. You did what?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And I remember really specifically being so kind of proud at that time to see you on things like This Morning. It just seemed really in those early days to have quite an initial boost of press and, you know, really major television shows picking you up and seeing you being interviewed on there. Did you have to undertake any training to be in the public eye? Because I know for both of you, that also wasn't your profession. You know, you're not trained public speakers. Was there a sense of needing to kind of skill up in that area?
Yeah, we'd both done media training.
Oh, it was only like half a day.
It was only half, yeah, but it's just
it's the basics. Matthew's like, come on, it's fine.
Yeah. Job done. I mean, it did show, and also because you don't get time to practice throughout the year. I mean, all our interviews are coming in a flurry in January. So so by the end of January, yeah, you're really an expert, and I've really honed my messages and skill. But 1st of January, and I think that was it. We'd launched the book, How to Go Vegan, and the publishers really got us some high profile interviews. So we were on Sky News, and that was This Morning, and BBC, Radio 5 Live. And that Sky News one was in the 1st of January. So really no preparation beforehand, only just what you were doing at home. And of course they asked me about protein, and it was just one of the things I wasn't prepared. All the challenging questions, there was the ones that were going over. I mumbled something about having beans on toast for breakfast, and I could see Matthew glaring at me. I answered that so much better. Anyway.
I think it was like 6:00 on New Year's Day, so everybody was like still in bed hungover. So I don't. Let's not worry about it. I said to you at the time.
We'll not link that one in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well, I remember the Radio 5 one was Adrian Childs interviewed us, and he's vegan or veganish. Okay. So we thought, this is going to be a nice, easy one. And he gave us the toughest interview ever. Yeah, because he knew what all the questions were that people get asked. Right. So he was like ready and prepared and what have you. Whereas we went on Steve Wright in the afternoon, which I was quite excited about because I used to listen to that, you know, and he was lovely. He was really, really nice and just didn't give us any hassle. He just let us tell our piece and what have you. And that was quite nice. So yeah, different experiences. Yeah. I'm still really terrible at public speaking though, even with or without the media.
You used to put me forward for the Radio 4 stuff, yeah.
Yeah, only because Jane's slightly posher than me. So I always felt that she sounded better on Radio 4 than me.
Good for the brand. Yeah. So obviously there's so much has changed over this last 10 years, right from that sort of conception of Veganuary through to now, shift in plant-based offerings. Matthew, you spoke at length in your opening talk on those kind of changes and what needs to be done. We've seen much more alternatives in supermarkets, the media coverage of the topic. But is there one specific kind of memory from that last 10 years that really stands out to you two? You know, separately, that is that one thing that you'll remember for years to come?
It was Christmas Day, 2019. We had the dinner. We were all relaxing, holding the stomachs.
Tofurkey, was it?
Yeah. All the tofurkey. And we were watching Gavin and Stacey Christmas special.
Obviously.
And one of the characters mentioned that they were doing dry January, so our ears pricked up. And then another character said, and I'm doing Veganuary. I mentioned Veganuary. And your mum was asleep or throwing stuff at her. She was waking up. What's going on? Just been mentioned. And then your phone started buzzing, didn't they, with everybody going, you've been on, yeah, you've seen it. But
17 million people watched that.
17 million.
17 million. It was the highest rated sort of show over that Christmas period.
Christmas decade. It was the most watched Christmas show in a decade was that episode. So, and talk about, going back to the question about what we wanted to do, bring it into the cultural mainstream. That was just such a pivotal moment.
Yeah, and for that not to have been planted.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing to do with us.
In the social, some writer somewhere has gone, well, that's a relevant thing to say.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, we've been on EastEnders and Coronation Street and other shows as well, but I think that was the one that you remember.
Just seeing it live.
Yeah. For me, it's like there's been so many different things you forget about them. You know, celebrities taking part, media interviews, media pieces. But the one thing that stands out for me is a bit weird. Well, not weird, but Veganuary went in the dictionary. So to think that we'd created a word like that's in the dictionary, I'm like, just this guy that born in Wakefield in West Yorkshire comes up with a word. You know, that was like really like unbelievable for me. And other things like when first time I found that there was a Veganuary Wikipedia page, like somebody cared to actually create a Wikipedia page about it. Like we didn't do it, it just happened on its own. So some of those weird things, you know, were the bits that stand out for me.
Yeah, kind of the bits that are out of your control, which really meant that it was placed in that, you know, really in the household name and had that kind of social influence that you hoped it had. So those are lovely markers of times where that has been proven and not been planted, which is lovely. What would you say has changed the most over the last 10 years? I know, Matthew, again, you spoke about lots of different areas in which needs to be improved, but what stands out to you as the thing that's changed?
Well, I mean, obviously availability of products, you know, like prior to Veganuary and prior to me sort of transitioning my life towards this work, I sold double glazing and I sold it around the UK. So I spent a lot of time running up and down the motorways. And if you went to the service areas 10 to 12 years ago, there was really very little to eat. I mean, you're looking at peanuts, you know, maybe some fruit, you know, it wasn't obvious, it was difficult. Whereas now you got to a service area on a motorway service, you know, there's going to be an M&S, there's a Waitrose potentially, the Burger King or the KFC are going to have vegan options. So, and that really stands out to me. But think about that across all of the restaurants, all of the retailers, the supermarkets and everything. So, I mean, the number of vegans has gone from 250,000 to 1.5 million in 10 years. In the UK. And you know, it's a lot more mainstream. I think if you'd have asked people 10, 12 years ago, a lot of people wouldn't have even known what vegan meant, whereas I think that's different. But I also think if you're looking at it from a 10-year perspective, I almost see it as like a 6 or 7 year period and then a 3 or 4 year period where the first 6 or 7 years, it felt like it was growing pretty fast. And then the last 3 or 4 years, it's just plateaued and possibly been in a little bit of decline as well. So when you look at it over 10 years, of course, it's grown massively. But yeah, we've just lost the edge recently.
Yeah, sure.
Things that have changed over those 10 years is the celebrity and influencer engagement that's really helped propel it forward into the mainstream again. And we've had some fantastic ambassadors with Veganuary, Deborah Meaden, Jasmine Harmon, Chris Packham. We also got the big Billie Eilish and Lewis Hamilton. I think that has been one of the changes that have happened in the last 10 years. People actually willing to put themselves out there and say, I'm vegan, I'm predominantly plant-based. And the research and the studies that we've had in the last 10 years across multiple sectors. So we know that a number of health arguments that have come out. They always had the World Health Organization and their reviews of meat products, the environmental studies, Joseph Poor, Oxford University, that coming out, that was massive in terms for veganism. And also the social movement research that's being done by incredible organizations doing that to see what's working, what's effective, what else can we try.
Yeah, because I guess when you were first starting out, I guess that even if it was happening, it was kind of less prominent or perhaps less focused on the data that you needed, the research you needed to know, like, are these things making a difference? You know, how much impact is the pledge having? And I think you're right, Matthew, in terms of in terms of veganism. I think it's been a while since I've had to explain what vegan is, but I imagine perhaps in those early days that was how a lot of your time and interviews and talking to people was spent, just actually describing what the term meant, because as you say, it just wasn't in that public knowledge, was it?
Yeah.
How many people used to say, can you eat bread? Because it confused celiac and veganism.
Yeah. Well, it's gluten-free.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do you think that's right? Is that kind of has the way that you talk about Veganuary, maybe your work, like, shifted because of that knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's the stats? Is it something like 70 or 80% of the UK population knows what Veganuary is?
Wow.
It's huge. But I mean, we haven't had the same success in other countries. Unfortunately, in the US, it would be much lower than that. And also an understanding of veganism and what vegan is. We've all probably traveled to other countries and it's not at the same level as it is here. So in many respects, it's not just Veganuary, by the way. We've been part of an ecosystem. Sure. There's been so many other groups here, so many activists. I think we've sort of ridden the wave of what has also been happening in this country. One thing we haven't mentioned is we're actually, I think, almost like bigger in Germany now than we are in the UK. Yeah, it's. I mean, that's partly because Ria Rayberg, who's our CEO, she's based in Berlin and built a team there. And interestingly, plant-based foods, there's a lot more progress there at the moment. It's still in growth, whereas in the UK, it's been tailing off a little bit. What we don't want is like maybe the Veganuary effect that we had in 2019, 2020, and then it's tailed off a bit, that maybe it's like the same going to happen in Germany and it might tail off a bit in a few years, but hopefully not.
It's a healthy rivalry we've got to go with, because when we first hired her, she always, Berlin was number one, wasn't it? And then the UK took over, and she's always been trying to get it back,
driving it forward, just that rivalry. Yeah, interesting. And so great reflections there. I love all of the anecdotal tales that you have, and just from sitting and chatting with you both often about just these little moments that you remember in that journey. And so in 2019, you decided to step away from the kind of operational day-to-day running, let's say, of the organization to move to advisory roles. Matthew, you were on the board, the chair, and Jane, you still serve as the chair, having taken over from Matthew. What led to that decision?
I struggled. I get bored very easily, and I can't stick around doing something for the same for very long. It's just I don't suffer from founder syndrome at all. I'm like, I really want to hand over to somebody else to take it on. So that was partly it from a Veganuary perspective, and so that allowed me personally to go on and set up Veg Capital and VFC and whatever. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was still, intimately involved in Veganuary. I also hate bureaucracy, and I enjoy the startup culture. I love that entrepreneurial spirit in the early days, but Veganuary had to grow up, and you start building teams, and you've got to start thinking about HR and risk assessments and all that sort of stuff. And I zone out. It's this is time for me to go. So it was partly that.
And of course, you got your charity status, which
exactly.
sort of limits the amount of risks that you're able to take within the organization, and what you can say and the campaigns that you can do. Do you think that played a part?
Yeah, I think I was a risk to Veganuary if I stayed around.
Do you agree with that?
I'd second that. For me, it was more, I guess, from working with Matthew, burnout, and it was 5 years of very intense work. I'd left my full-time job and got onto this. We had one other member of staff, but it was just very intense. So anybody who's been in an organization those startup days, there's a fantastic meme that's a line graph, and you've got the first peak, which is, this is so exciting, the start of, I can't wait to get started on it, and then it just crashes, and like, shit, what have we done? This is awful. Run out of money, I've got no sleep. And then you get little peaks of interest with, we've got so many people on our website, and we're looking at Google Analytics, or we've made a connection with a corporate sponsor, and you get those peaks. But it was a very fluctuating, chaotic chart of feelings during those years.
I used to watch Google Analytics live, like on a Saturday night. That would just be there, like watching. Oh, we've got 500 people on our website. Oh, it's 550 now. It's really super exciting for me, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Is that in the early days or kind of later on?
In the early days, well, probably like up to like the first 3 or 4 or 5 years every year. And I used to track it. I had spreadsheets, how many people signed up like December the 12th this year compared to December the 12th last year, and tracking it all. I like a spreadsheet every now and then. Yeah. We did get burnt out. And, one of the challenges that I have generally is that I'm spread like a mile wide, but like an inch thick.
Right.
In terms of so many different projects. And I keep setting them up. And then it's something that I'm trying to talk through with my therapist to like stop doing that. So handling that. So there's been periods of like extreme burnout and then like moving away from it. But I actually at one point as well decided that I had enough of activism because it was like really stressful and hard work and everything. So that's why I decided to move into the business side and set up Veg Capital. I found out that was hard as well. And then I wanted to come back to the activism. So I can't make my mind up what I should be doing, really.
Yeah, sure.
But either way, it was absolutely the right decision. I mean, I think we'd taken the organisation as far as it could go, and it really then needed people who knew what they were doing to come on in and professionalise it and adhere to all those regulations that we needed to do. And then we found that in the fantastic team that we've got in place now.
Yeah, of course. And Ria's so great. And like you say, taking that kind of to the next level past the point. I think I remember you doing the post and seeing, it was like a picture of you with a cow, wasn't it? Both of you. And you might know the sort of announcement post. And I was thinking, no, it's like their baby. I hope we're not losing you out of the movement, and, really concerned that these really pivotal figures were moving on, but we didn't get rid of you, thankfully. You carried on and started various other projects, like you were saying. So Jane, you now work for Veg Trust. Can you talk us through a little bit about the work there?
Yeah, so Veg Trust is a grant giving organisation. So we give financial support to animal advocates who are working to reduce animal suffering, who are doing vegan education. We've got 3 priority areas, which is those working on public engagement, corporate and institutional work, that's changing menus, and movement building. And we do a little bit of direct care. We launched that last year. Sadly, applications aren't open at the moment, but do check back later in the year. We'll be opening those back up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we can link that as well. And Matthew, so you, as you say, you kind of were really deep into the activism work, and then you focusing on the plant-based food sector with VFC, recruiting brands who, as you said, are really sadly collapsing. What made you focus on that corporate space specifically?
If you go back 4 or 5 years, well, maybe 4 years ago when we set up Veg Capital, at that point in time, the plant-based food sector was really riding a wave. There was a huge amount of money coming into the space. Beyond Meat was about to IPO, and Oatly as well, doing particularly well. So I talked with some mission-aligned investors about creating something for the UK, because I knew there was a lot of exciting projects that were struggling to get funding at the time. And over the last 4 years, we've invested in about 30 companies. Some are just like small checks, like we have like 1% of the business, and some of them we own. So it's like a spectrum across there. And what I would say we found is that of the 30 companies, none of them are making money.
Right.
It's a struggle, and it's not just the ones that we've invested in. If you extrapolate that to all plant-based companies that have set up in the last 5 years, everywhere in the world, including precision fermentation, including cultivated meat, unfortunately, none of them are, or very few of them are profitable at the moment. And what's happened more recently is Beyond Meat's stock prices collapsed. Same with Oatly. The products have not been selling very well. Money has started drying up, and we've got to a position where a lot of these businesses, their runways are starting to run out. They're cutting back on staff. So where we are now is consolidation is desperately required. And we think actually there's opportunity there. It's needed. The retailers are telling us that there was way too many brands. There was too many new products. And in actual fact, what we need to do is consolidate what we've got. That might mean reduced amount of space available, but the products that are left are going to be better quality.
Okay.
But unfortunately, it's going to mean a smaller number of brands. So a lot of the challenger brands, unfortunately, are going to disappear. That's sort of the context of it. We noticed and we heard about Meatless Farm getting into financial difficulty. We were running VFC. VFC wasn't gaining the traction that it needed. Meatless Farm was about to go, or did go bust, basically.
Yes.
So we did a deal with the administrator to buy that brand, buy the intellectual property, the website, all of that stuff, merge it into VFC. And then by having two brands, but with one team running it, we became suddenly more efficient.
Right.
And it sort of started to make sense. And then we added Clive's Pies, which is an organic pie company. Then we thought, okay, this is an idea. So we've got Meatless Farm, VFC. Why don't we create like a holding group, which we call Vegan Food Group? And why don't we try and create a vegan Unilever idea, which is, the majority of the profits are going to go to charity, but we're still going to think big like Donald Trump does. And sorry, I don't really like Donald Trump, by the way, if that wasn't obvious. So let's create that structure and let's create a buy and build strategy. So we'll try and organically grow, obviously, with the brands that we've got. But, if that's a struggle, we'll also buy up some of these businesses that are in trouble. So just a couple of months ago, we bought a company called Tofu Town, which not particularly well known, but a huge business, doing 60 million in sales in Europe, supplying tofu, meat alternatives, spreads, 2 huge factories, both of them underutilized. So what we've done is we've bought that business, brought that into the mix, and now we have 3 manufacturing sites. We have plenty of scale. We've got distribution and manufacturing. So now we're in a position where, and they're all 100% plant-based facilities, so there's no risk of contamination or anything. And because we've made this announcement, my phone's ringing all the time because, people want to talk. So it's about choosing the right opportunities that are going to fit with our sort of ethos, really.
Right.
Sorry, I'm rabbiting on a bit, but is this interesting?
It is.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to support everybody that sort of fits under that umbrella, right? You're going to be declining a lot.
Yeah, obviously it's difficult because, we don't want to have to build a really small brand up. We want businesses that have already got some sort of sales and traction. That's, and also we don't want to cannibalize our existing range. So it doesn't make sense for us to buy another company that does burgers and sausages because we've got that with Meatless Farm. And we're going to stick with chilled and frozen, and it's meat alternative, center of plate items, because that's where we're going to remove the most animals from the food system, and then focusing on Europe, the whole of Europe and the UK primarily at the moment. We'll export to other areas, and then also providing both supplying retail and food service. So we've got a mission to try and get to 100 million in sales over the next year or two. That could happen like overnight with the right acquisition.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
And of course, so back in Veganuary, you also had corporate work. You were working with brands back then. You were doing institutional work. Was it in those initial days when you were doing the pledge? How soon after doing the pledge did you think that actually Veganuary's work could have been helpful in different sectors to progress those as well?
Initially, it was definitely an individual diet change pledge. That was what we had in mind. That was a concept that we launched with.
Yeah.
But very quickly, the first year, we noticed Ocado had put our logo on their website. Tesco had mentioned us on Twitter. And we had nothing to do with this. This was all organic. And we absolutely embraced that. The next year, we really tried to engage with them. And it was so easy. Who knew? It was really pushing against an open door, wasn't it? I think the year after that, 2015, one of the first companies to come on board with us was a handmade burger company. Who'd have thought? I mean, there was a vegan insider. That's what it was. Yeah. So she was doing the marketing and PR, and she contacted us and said, and she put 4 new vegan burgers on their menu. And we met with them afterwards, and they did a 50% off. And it was the biggest redemption voucher that they'd ever run in the entire history of the company. And we want to work with you again, want to go with you again. And we said, great, yes. Out of interest, where was the biggest take-up, throughout the country? And it was Aberdeen, wasn't it? Was the most... I
think there's probably just one family in Aberdeen that was going there every day, for the 50% off. Yeah.
And I went, I'm the least. And she went, Wakefield, which is Matthew's hometown.
Matthew.
It's like a vegan desert in Wakefield, unfortunately.
Not enough advocacy at home.
Yeah, but we did, it was very, very soon after we started, businesses were contacting us, not just vegan businesses that wanted to get a bit of the action, but also, other bigger established food companies would contact us just to sort of understand what was going on and for us to be advisors. So, I remember going and giving a talk to Unilever, but to all of their marketing managers. So there was the marketing manager of Ben & Jerry's and Marmite and Pot Noodle and whatever these other brands were, and just pitching, why this is so important. And, and I think a lot of people are really sort of skeptical about these big companies, and obviously there's a lot of concern about capitalism. I sort of agree with all of that, of course I do. But at the same time, such lovely people that we were hanging out with, and, we shared some of the same values. So if we can just work on that. Yeah. And then another example I have is Greencore, that their insights team wanted us to go in. So I went and again put my suit on and went to Greencore's headquarters and talked to them and just advised them, because they manufacture sandwiches, like own brand sandwiches that go into a lot of the big supermarkets. At the time, they were showing me, look, this is the range that we've got at the moment. And it would be like roasted vegetables in a sandwich. And I'm like, well, this is what we've developed. And I'm like, well, would you buy that? Roasted vegetables in a sandwich. And they're like, no, but it's not for me, it's for you guys. And I'm like, we don't want to eat that either. Come on, let's be a bit more creative here. So then I'd just sit down and say, look, this is actually, weirdly, we like to eat the same sort of stuff as everybody else, but just with no animals found, So that was like, penny drops,
Yeah.
So I enjoyed doing all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Such a big part of it, wasn't it? The corporate work and the institutional stuff. And I think that's really what made it into that household name, because not only was I seeing it on the television or in the press, but then going to a restaurant and seeing it on the menu, or, seeing that they were doing collaborations on certain products, like that real kind of breadth approach, I think made it really successful, certainly. Any regrets that you can think about from those kind of early days, looking back retrospectively now? Anything that springs to mind?
I think you're going to get 2 very different answers. I have regrets. I think we went too fast.
Oh, I was going to say too slow.
It was so intense. I mean, and we did plow all our savings into it, which at one point we had to make a decision: do we keep living in our own home or do we move in with your mum? Of course, Matthew, we'll just move in with my mum, she'll be fine. And she was lovely. She embraced us. She had a dog, so that was an easy win for me to go and live with her. We turned in her dining room into Veganuary HQ. There was wristbands, there was milk everywhere, because one of the sponsors was milk. So I think she was still drinking it for months after we'd moved out.
And you hadn't actually been together that long at this point, had you?
No.
Well, I'd forgotten that. When I had the idea, we weren't living together. We were still dating at that point in time. Right. So that should have put you off me, really. I don't really have any regrets, really. None that really springs to mind.
No, it's all worked out in the end, isn't it?
Yeah. Probably do a lot of the same stuff again, really.
Do you think you would, in terms of like pushing harder, I guess? So you talked about like big ideas and taking risks. Like, do you think you would have gone further? I know, interestingly, actually, with the VFC brand, I was talking to Jane actually earlier in the conference about the Cluckwits responses to comments that you were doing through VFC. So this is sort of responding to trolls and really calling them out on their silly responses to the brand. Would you have taken some of that flavour into Veganuary, or do you think that's only really worked because it's an independent food brand?
I mean, I think if I was like head of communications at Veganuary, I think we'd probably take bigger risks and be probably more edgy and judgmental, and preachy, and all that stuff, being honest. But that's why I'm not the head of communications there.
Sure.
And part of the reason why Veganuary has been so successful is because, it is friendly and, supportive and a bit boring and all that stuff.
No,
oh, no.
It's open to all.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, that was
Delete
on the
that.
outset. It was. the colours of Veganuary was vibrant. It was upbeat. It was. Yeah.
And I think everybody needed that friendly space to go to, right? Because at the time you could engage with veganism through the animal rights groups, and a lot of that is very kind of like you're seeing a lot of traumatic imagery, you're seeing a lot of graphic stuff, and actually Veganuary, whilst you still sort of, sometimes showed that stuff, it felt like quite a safe space. So I think in terms of being accessible to everybody, we didn't have anything maybe that was filling that gap in terms of providing that more sort of friendly content.
We actually did do undercover investigations in the early days, but they didn't particularly do that well, did they? So if you search around on the internet, you can find one or two videos that we did.
Don't.
Okay, don't sit around. But I think we also realised that that you've got different groups that are specialists in different areas, and that's not really Veganuary speciality. Much that I wanted to do that. There's other groups better suited to do it, so we stuck to doing what we were good at.
The motivation behind that was we just wanted to see for ourselves.
Yeah.
We were going out there, we were getting asked all these questions. Well, it's fine, look. And I think, okay, I've seen plenty of footage, but I haven't seen it with my own eyes. And I think that was important for us at that stage of being activists.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's talk numbers then. So what do we know about the sort of rise in veganism since 2014 and that conception? And how have you measured that across those 10 years at Veganuary?
Well, we don't sort of measure the movement as a whole, so there's others that have done that. I think the metrics that Veganuary tends to look at is Veganuary's impact.
Right.
And that's been measured in multiple different ways. We always put an end-of-year campaign report out, which tracks, how many media articles we generated, how many new items have gone on restaurant menus, how many new products have been launched, as well as the numbers that are taking part. Jane, do you want to explain, maybe how that's changed over the last year or so?
Yeah, so initially it was always, as Matthew said, the Google Analytics. We were tracking who was coming on the website and how many signups we were getting. Quickly realised that this is not, can't keep using this metric because as vegan resources increased, because people weren't coming or they didn't want to sign up, they didn't want to give you your details, and that's understandable. But we knew from a Kantar study that we conducted that for every person who signed up on the website, at least 10 more people were taking part.
Oh, interesting. So they were doing it, but not necessarily signing up for the resources. Yeah. So it was in that sort of social sphere enough that people were doing it, but not even necessarily knowing that it was a pledge or to sign up or you were a charity or...
people still don't know that, do they?
Yeah.
No. So we've surveys have been the better way for us to go. So now we YouGov surveys every year, and we can do it in each of the chapter countries and our partner organisations to see where we're growing. And it just seems a much more reliable and consistent metric for us to use.
Yeah, sure. Because I definitely remember sort of measuring the success based on those pledge numbers. And so in 2014, it was about 3,000, right? And then so at the point at which you stopped kind of measuring that as a useful metric, what were the kind of numbers you were working with?
It was 700,000 in that region. Yeah. But that was internationally.
Right.
And you can skew that by how much advertising budget you've got, and which countries that you're targeting as well.
Yeah.
would affect that. But I think we've come to the realization that it's not just about sign-up numbers. It's more about everything else. It's the bigger picture of Veganuary that we're looking at, and it's about more corporate outreach in more countries. Sort of taking it international, gaining more media attention, positive media attention, hopefully, that really sort of helps to mainstream veganism, not just in the UK, but in other countries as well.
Yeah. And I'm interested to know, so in terms of those stats, trying to convert someone who's perhaps thought about it or, what we would class as a low-hanging fruit, what were the best ways, perhaps in those early days, of engaging that person and so much that they decided to take a pledge or to engage with Veganuary? Is there a specific sort of platform or way that you would try and target those people in order to get them on board?
Yeah, Facebook. So from the very first campaign, we put £100 behind Facebook ads, and that helped get us at 3,300 participants.
Yeah.
And then year on year, over 10 years on, Facebook is still the number one, even though it may be dying as a social media platform. It's still our strongest performing one of getting sign-ups. I mean, the age group is, the category is between 30, 40, 35, 45.
I think our average person was a 34-year-old female from London at one point. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Veganuary's had over the last few years one guy, Kieran, who specialises pretty much in targeting. So, he would look at different audiences, test different messages with different audiences in different countries. You can do the lookalike testing. So you can target the 1% of people that are most like the people that are following your page or your current subscribers. And that tends to unlock people that are more similar to people that are already vegan. So that's typically how we've done it.
We did try one year because, as you mentioned, this is the skewed between women. It's typically been about an 80-20 split of women taking part. That's been very consistent throughout the years. And one year we did think, okay, well, let's try and get more men on board. And it just cost you double the amount to get a sign up from a man. And we thought, well, do we really need this? Because what we were learning anecdotally when we were speaking to people is that the men were coming along in heterosexual relationships. It was still the women who were doing the bulk of the cooking, the bulk of the shopping. Right. And so they were coming along by default because they were just, okay, I'm eating this now for January. I'm like, yes. So we're getting them that way.
Right. Okay. It's kind of secondhand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And so let's move on to some sort of future opportunities then. What do you think are the most promising opportunities to progress animal liberation in our movement at the moment?
One concern I have is that we are underfunded as a movement in comparison to, I mentioned that the New York Metropolitan Opera has a bigger budget than the whole vegan diet change movement globally, just to give you an understanding of how small we are. So I think if we can work on meta fundraising, how do we bring, more philanthropists and grant-making organizations to support this movement, that would potentially, we could scale up faster. Beyond that, I think I'm really excited about the opportunity of AI. I've mentioned a few times that I type with one finger. That's my computer skills. I have two fingers, actually. I put one on shift and then I just type really fast like this. I can nearly keep up with you, can't I? Although we have sort of had a race and I lost. Yeah, no, I think AI is really, really exciting. I don't have the answers for it, but I think I'm trying to learn it. And I know there's a lot of people that I've been talking to that are really thinking about this. So how do we get a head start on the competition, if you like, in this area? I think we've got a good chance of doing that if it's resourced properly. And then just more generally, the organisation that we work with on the philanthropic side is we're interested in funding diet change initiatives. That can be reducitarian, it can be vegan, but working, on strategies to change people's diets. And, we're looking to fund campaigns that reach a mainstream or influential audience that's got the potential of going mainstream in a cost-effective way. So if we can do that successfully, I don't think at the moment there's pockets that are doing very well, but I think as a movement, I don't think we're doing enough of it.
Yeah.
We're not reaching enough people. So if we can improve that, I think it would help us get into growth quicker.
Yeah.
Is there anything I've missed?
What do you think, Jane?
From a Veg Trust perspective, more research about it does feel a lot like guesswork at the moment, that we're okay with these. We think these are most effective. We're looking at past movements and trying to apply that here. But do we already know yet? No, we're just spreading a bet. So more research that we can have, the likes of Animal Think Tank, we've heard from a lot this weekend. That's been incredibly useful. Social Change Lab, following their work as well.
James will be pleased with that. Shout out for Social Change Lab. Is there something from either of those organisations that stands out as a good resource, or something that you would recommend people read? Something that stands out?
Go to the websites, and I think the civil disobedience was really useful. I mean, they've been looking at Just Stop Oil as well, and how that can apply to us. And in terms of Animal Think Tank, it was the messaging guide. And I share that with a lot of the organisations that I work with as well. It's been really useful.
Yeah, of course. Amazing. Well, I've always really admired both of your pragmatic approach to this, really challenging battle that we have ahead. I think that sort of dose of realism, which you certainly gave in the opening talk of this conference, is really necessary, and actually I hope acts as a real motivator for people to assess what they're doing, and is it really pushing us towards that shared goal of animal liberation in the most effective way that they can push that forward. I feel like you're both incredibly humble members of the movement, and I've loved hearing about your journey and those small sort of stories that you bring to talk about those last 10 years. It's just been an absolute pleasure to interview you both today. The episode will be released once we've got all of that information together, so I'm really excited for other listeners to hear the podcast episode and hear about your work. But for now, just thank you both so much.
Thank you, Amy, for having us.